Hello and welcome to the Anime Ramblin' Boys podcast, ARB for short. I am one of your hosts, Tropical Robot, aka the metallic hunk of wood. And these are my co-hosts.
Hey, yo, what up, everybody? It's Bass. I swear to God that this is probably going to be a real fun episode, or it's going to be absolutely awful. Haven't decided yet.
Hey y'all, it's y'all partner Tex Ranger, and I gotta say, me trying to be a teacher, I am lacking in some key physical attributes.
Hi everyone, I'm Silver, and abolish the police.
I mean, y'all know it's a moment of heightened political intensity. But we're not gonna talk about that right here, except to say, I mean, you already know Black Lives Matter. All day. I'll move us into the content of today's show, which is actually going to be Assassination Classroom. And with that said, general impressions of the show, gentlemen. What did you think?
Well, honestly, man, I think it's a solid show. I liked it. It's not like one of those shows where it's finished it once, tomorrow time for round 2 of Assassination Classroom. But I think it was pretty interesting. It is different in a lot of sense, and I know we're gonna talk about it later. But I think it was a solid show. It is.
All right, so we only watched season 1, just so everyone can clarify. And I think, as we said before, me and Tropical have never seen this show before. Silver has seen this, and then Texas Ranger, you've seen part of it, but this is I don't remember. Did you say you've seen all of it?
Oh yeah, I've seen it all.
Okay. So season 1, first time viewer. I want everyone to just lean in real close. I hated this show. Oh my God, no cap, I'm not lying. This is one of my least favorite shows I've ever finished. And honestly, I can know the episode. If it wasn't for you 3 guys here, I would have dropped this show after episode 10. Oh my God.
What was episode 10 again?
The baseball episode.
That's baseball.
Oh!
I would have dropped it in the middle of that episode, but no. We had to do this, and I kept powering. And I know you guys here will get into it more later, but yeah, I hated this show so much.
Didn't you, we spoke about this briefly a couple weeks ago, but didn't you have a sort of crisis of consciousness as you were watching the show?
Should I get into it here? Yes, I had a crisis because it was in the middle of also watching Gardens of Sinners, which is another critically acclaimed show, and I dropped that because I didn't like it either. So I actually took hours sitting in my room just being what is wrong with me? Why am I not connecting? Where is it? What am I missing? So I had so many times where it's just what is wrong with me while watching this show? But maybe we'll get into it the more we talk about it, and I'll make my thoughts known.
Nothing's wrong with you, man. That's okay. When we first watched it with my little brothers, well, we had to get back into it a couple times to finish. That's okay. I understand.
I guess for me, I think at the level, and look, I'm not someone who's particularly well versed in analyzing shows or books, the kind of literary analysis that looks at character arcs or looks at I don't know, plot consistency, etc. That's not necessarily my bread and butter, as it were, but I did have plenty of criticisms of the show. I think a lot of them kind of are based on so I don't think it's a bad show. I think it's a show that certainly has promising moments, and I guess my take on the show, aesthetically at least, is that I enjoyed it, but there were definitely moments where I was well, I like this plot of this episode and kind of character thread or whatever, but I feel disappointed in that they kind of set this interesting question or interesting dynamic up, and then they don't really follow through with it, and I'll get into that more as we actually, begin to speak of more in depth about the show. In addition to that, the last arc, and we'll have some time to talk about this, but the last arc was just absolute trash. Of the first season, absolute garbage, and we will get into that. But before getting into that, the second, general remark that I wanted to make is that I think this show is interesting in the sense that it lends itself to a discussion of ideas. Like, I would say similar to, The Promised Neverland, though, artistically, literarily, it's not as good as The Promised Neverland, but it does lend itself to an interesting discussion of ideas, if that makes sense. And we'll get into that. And this is my perspective, and we'll get into that more so in a little bit. How about you, Silver? What did you think of the show?
Well, I'm a little bit biased because one, I love comedy, and for the most part, even though I wouldn't call this show a full-on comedy, it does have comedic moments, especially so some of the better scenes in part 2. But overall, I've seen the entire show already, so I'm gonna try to keep my analysis points to the first half and not try to have the knowledge of the second part cloud my judgment of critically talking about the first part. Overall, the show, especially just part 1, if it was just standalone, I would probably, if it was just standalone, I'd probably give it like a C minus. Kuro Sensei is honestly my favorite part about the show, and as much as I overall like the show, I would have dropped it if it wasn't for Kuro Sensei, even in part 1. He's the only thing, to me, he makes the show. A lot of this falls down into an issue that I see in a lot of anime that are classroom based, aside from maybe 1 or 2 that kind of tried their best to do it right. But it's just when you have that many characters, there's just not going to be that much characterization. There's going to be 1, 2, or 3 that are stand out above everyone else, and everyone else is just kind of there. That's honestly where a lot of the major issues of the show can even if they're not character related, they can stem back into that issue. It all comes back to that. But I try to not think too much about it. I try to appreciate the show for what it is. It's not a full-on drama like something like Fate Zero. It's not a full-on comedy like Konosuba or Gintama. And that's both a good thing and bad thing because it doesn't really do either one spectacularly. The comedy sometimes can be good. Overall, I can name 10 different comedies that are much better in anime than this. And same thing for the drama part of it. I feel like it tried to do a mix of the two, and it kind of lost what identity it was trying to go for in episode 4, and it just never really kind of recovered it. I will say, it does kind of pick up its identity in part 2. It kind of drops one a little bit more so for the other, and the effect is good in terms of the plot, but I won't get into much about that. But one of my biggest issues with part 1 as a whole is just that the show doesn't really know what kind of show it is, and we still don't even know a half of the major plot points. That was another issue that I had with it. That's me saying it, thinking it retroactively, knowing everything that I do in part 2. If they would have added even the first 5 episodes of part 2 in part 1, it would make a lot more sense, because right now there's not really a lot of the backstory that you know of, or at least the actual backstory about what's actually going on.
So I think with that said, I think I'll just move us to kind of discussing some of the aesthetic elements of the show. So things such as the characters, their different arcs. I guess also plot, whether they be episodic plots or arc by arc plots, etc. And I'll open it up to my fellow Ramblin' Boys. Let's go. What's coming to people's minds?
Oh, okay. Even though I hate it, let's do some positives. Character designs, very nice. The characters, even in the school setting, have the diverse hair, the way the show looks, very Danganronpa-ish. And then I learned that the director of this show also directed the Danganronpa anime. I don't know if Danganronpa, the video games, have the same animation staff, but that's how I felt watching those characters work. And I was like, oh, it's the sharp, dark, black outlined angles. And I was like, okay, that's cool. It doesn't look bad. Nothing looks bad. Everything flows fine. The music is there. I didn't particularly note it or dislike it. There wasn't any point where I was like, oh, the music. But even the OP is a giant meme. The freaking people can't see me, but I'm doing the whole running freaking on the beach meme thing, and I'm like, oh, that's a meme and a half, and the jumping too. So all that's all well and good. Art direction's fine. It's good. When I say fine, I generally mean like, oh, it's good. It fits like the world and all that, and everyone's animated fine. I guess my biggest critique is, as you said, Silver, this show doesn't know what it wants to be. Like, it's classified like as a shonen, but then you think it's gonna be like a battle or ish type shonen thing, but then it's not. Then it wants to be a slice of life show, like actually just going to school and a normal school show, but then it doesn't again. And then these things just they don't do a good job of intersecting the points that they want them to intersect with. Like, there are definitely just clear episodes that are like in this side, and then clear episodes that are on the other side, and then episodes that just don't do either. And you're like, what are we here for? And I feel like that disconnect creates, in my head, there would be things that are referenced like in the first couple episodes that are building up that then just don't apply at all later in the show. And so a lot of times when I'm watching, I think my main thing was always just like, what are the rules? Like, what is this? What am I trying to form with this show? And then every time that conflict happened, I just kept going, this is not good. this isn't fine. Before I go on, though, does anyone else want to comment on maybe more aesthetic values of the show?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like with me, I think this does happen. Like, oh, well, how do I put this? It's like, it's kind of weird the way that the show takes on characters. I think, okay, so there's two things coming up in my mind right now. I think I'll go with the kind of one that's not connected to something Silver already mentioned. So I think that one of my biggest gripes with the show is like the way it sort of like raises like interesting like either like they're character related in each case, in each distinctive example. In my mind they are character related, although one is kind of more concerned with like a plot mechanic and the other is more concerned with like, again, it's like the plot of the episode. I guess it's like these things kind of overlap, but I'm thinking firstly of the introduction of Karma. So I, at the moment when Karma was introduced, I was like, yes, I'm all for this, because I thought to myself, oh wow, like the show set up this dynamic of what you expect it's going to be. It's going to be the students trying to kill Koro Sensei, and Koro Sensei gradually like improving the students, and it's going to take place like at this like kind of level of like force meets like the teacher, who is also a force, but like the teacher is a force at like a physical level but also at like a psychological level, and so I'm like, oh, this is fine. And then they introduce Karma, and it like throws a monkey wrench right into that, and I'm like, oh, this is super interesting, because it's like Karma is like someone who has trauma around the fact that he had a teacher who betrayed him when he discovered that like this teacher was like driven primarily by self-interest and by careerism. And so Karma felt betrayed because there's a part in the plot where he tries to defend a student in the E class, which is the N class, which we'll get into later, and at the expense of one of the top ranking students in his in the teacher who betrayed him's class. And then the teacher kind of demonstrates to Karma, despite having previously praised Karma, that he really doesn't care about, he cares more about his career and like his standing rather than actual, this kind of model of like education where like the teacher cares about the student. And like Koro Sensei is very much like the, I guess like the inverse of that, because Koro Sensei does care about, his students. But when Karma and Koro Sensei clash, Karma is just kind of this like very smart but like violent kid, and he uses like tactics of like psychological manipulation. And I actually think that's one of the most interesting episodes in the show, because again it like throws a wrench into this dynamic where you're like, oh, I guess Koro Sensei is just going to be gradually improving each of the students. And it's like, oh, is he going to be able, how is he going to deal with Karma, right? How is he going to like help this kid overcome his trauma or whatever? And then rather than dragging that out or like seeing like using that mechanic as like something that could allow for like a more complex plot to develop, what the show does is just kind of resolve it in the first episode that Karma's introduced. And so I'm just like, okay, then it's just like Karma is like one of the regular students. And again, there's like interesting things to uplift from, you know, that episode, like, you know, this clash between like Koro Sensei and Karma being like, oh, I'm gonna you know, use these like tactics of intimidation, psychological intimidation. Koro Sensei being like, I guess I'll just use embarrassment, you know, psychological tactics of embarrassment. And that's super interesting. But it's just like, man, like, you know, like, how can you set up a character arc and resolve it so quickly? Like, that's just like, it's like, oh, okay, I don't know. And the show does that kind of on multiple occasions. So that's my comment on that. I could keep going on because I could keep talking about the AI girl, but I think I'll save that because I've been speaking for a little while and see what folks think about that.
Let's not mince words. They took that plot point, strapped it to a rocket, and jettisoned it away, and we're just like, we're never touching that ever again. Like, what you said about that they set up things and then either resolve them or just don't explore them. Like, Karma's whole thing. Yeah. First of all, I want to say, there are 4 characters in this class that are important.
And 2 of them are Koro Sensei.
There are 4. It's Karma, the main character, who... I just hate his hair and his voice. He's fine, but his hair is dumb. It looks like it's just they took a layer and then they copied it and then they just put a second layer on top. And I'm just like, what is this hair? How does this work? Do you have hair ties? I don't know. After her is AI girl and then like mean boy in back corner. And then I guess the other tentacle student, but he's not really in the class. But other than those 4 characters, no one matters. No one in the class. Everyone else. And I don't want to get on the case or anything to say that, like, oh, the show. But especially the female characters. 90% of these female characters are, what is your character? Oh, you're girl. You're a girl.
Yeah.
I guess there's one girl who's a little bit bigger than the other girls. Oh, what a character. Oh, man, I actually felt bad for her. I liked her, and I was like, man, that's dumb. But yeah, what you said about they like set up Karma to have this interesting dynamic, and then just that's it. He's just a normal kid in the class who's just like, oh, I'm now in the dynamic of the class of working together with like the other students, but like, what? You did this whole gambit where you discovered that Koro Sensei really wants to take care of the kids, so by like, and I guess we already said spoiler alert because you should know that we're going to talk about everything in season 1. When he tries to like off himself by jumping off the cliff and using that as a strategy, I was like, wait, this is such a galactic brain moment. Let's just use this. They never try it again because all the other students, for some reason, just are like, oh, but we do want to go to school though, like, I guess we're trying to kill him, which they set up in the first episode, but then, like, their attempts afterwards are all just such placated, regular mess. They never really try anything super deep until, like, the last arc, and even then, they tell us that they're like, oh, the kids are going to attempt something. Even Koro Sensei knows. They're going to attempt something, and it's all more about, like, their over-preparation instead of any sort of interesting mind game development. Ugh. So that's, yeah, I agree with you with that whole Karma thing. There's only 4 characters. That's it. Everyone else is useless. Is not here.
Yep.
And they just don't develop anything. Like,
yep.
Oh my God. Oh, that girl, she has strict parents. And so she goes out at night to play video games. That happens in 1 episode. And you never hear about it ever again.
Yeah, there's like an episodic treatment of some of the characters. I have a lot to say about that one, but I will reserve my comments until we get to kind of like the themes and like the how different kinds of ideology show up in the show. But yeah, it's like with AI girl, it's like they set up this potentially interesting, you know, philosophical question where it's like, at what point is a machine like, you know, a subject or whatever, or is like a machine something with like rights or something with like that agency? Like agency, yeah, or something that you know, with like I guess it's like with like what is like this like distinction between like a machine and like a like human, and like then like like of course like her kind of like Koro Sensei like beefs her up or whatever, and then like the like creator comes in and he's like, no, you're just a war machine. And it's like, oh boy, like that could have been really interesting. Like how, like, I don't even know, where could you have taken that? Like you probably could have taken that in a bunch of interesting directions, like a struggle for her to like, regain consciousness. Like, I don't even know how they would have like really written that, but like instead it's like, oh, nope, she had AI just kind of as like a thing and was able to like...
She hid the personality stuff from her creator so she
Yeah.
can still be who she is.
And that was
Woo! This is for you. This is for you, waifu Bates. This is for you. Because she has a great design. Like, let's not lie.
Yeah.
Let's not lie. She is
She's
best
honestly
girl.
one of the best characters.
She is top tier.
Top tier.
Top tier
She
characters.
top tier. But still,
Yeah.
I was just like, are you kidding me? This is...
Yeah.
Ugh!
They do a lot of
uh,
one and done arcs.
Quick.
Which, my last thing before Text Ranger wanted to go, it would have been fine if they just did this for each character. If every episode actually just focused on one
Yeah.
character. Because, like, the first 3 episodes, it's, like, learning. And then it's Karma. And then I think it's Baseball Dude. I forget his name.
It's baseball dude.
Okay, these are
It is
interesting.
Baseball Dude.
And it could be a set where they just do it where each character is learning their own individual quirks and strengths and how they think they're going to assassinate Koro Sensei. Nope. They just don't. They don't do it. They don't. They could have, but they don't.
Maybe that's part of what the the kind of issue that you and I are detecting base, which like the show feels like it has like there doesn't seem to be a rhyme and reason to like the kind of structure of the show. It just kind of like switches between different kinds of structures and you end up with this like cacophony of different things that it's like trying to do, but like it never really does any of them particularly effectively. I don't know. But in any case, I guess with that said, this also makes me think of it's interesting because I think we'll be able to move towards like the second point that I wanted to raise from this discussion. But what I actually want to say is, Terasaka, I think is his name is, like the kind of dumb guy in the class, like the slacker or whatever. And then his whole thing is like these characters, it's like, hey man, like I don't know where like the notion that like relatability should be something that is like present in like the like characters and character arcs and stuff. I don't know, I'm sure there's some aesthetic theories behind it, I just haven't read it, but it's like this story and like the message of it is like so like it feels so like, what is a good word, like it's like detached, like out of touch is a good way to put it, because he's like oh like I'm gonna learn that not everybody's a leader and I should actually like be a follower and follow the right people, not the wrong people, which like is like very connected to like the ideology of the show. And I could go on, I could talk like, or like some of like the strings of like ideology in the show, because that's like very much like, what's that saying, like it's like, oh like to like people who are deemed, and we'll get more into this, but it's like people who are deemed like unmeritable in some way, shape or form, it's like something that's like inherent to them in some instances, and they should just kind of like bow down to the social order and like follow their superiors, and it's like, and in the show's like, and that's a good thing, and it's like, oh my god, I just reject like the premises that make this kind of like thing possible. Oh god, I can't resist. I'm sorry guys, I have to talk about Homegirl. That was the part of the show that most like pissed me off, man.
What?
Which
Like
I thought the final
Tokyo
arc pissed you more.
Okay, yeah, the final arc did piss me off more. I guess like character kind of like things. This is like what pissed me the most off. It was like Homegirl was like, oh, I come from like privileged parents, and it's like I'm so like alienated, which is like, yeah, like I could see that would make sense. But then she's like, I'm so alienated that I'm gonna go and like engage in some like good old
nefarious
fashioned
activity,
like
Debauchery.
lower
Lower
class.
class.
It's like lower class blackface essentially. And she's like, yeah, no, yeah. And she's like, oh, like, let me just, like, dress up as, like, a lower class person. And do
Aren't
the
I
things
so
that lower
bad?
class- Aren't I so bad? Look at me rebelling. And then it's like, it like, comes back to bite her in the butt. And then, like, the way they depict, like, the kind of guys who, it's like this, like, gang of, like, high schoolers that, like, kidnaps her. And it's like, of course, like, you know, there's like the whole moral thing where it's like, of course, like what they did in kidnapping the girls is like bad, you know what I'm saying? But it's like the depiction, like let's focus on like the depiction of those characters. And it's like, oh, these like marginalized, like bad, like criminals.
We know who you are.
People. It's like,
you're one of us. You try to act like you're better, but you're actually one of us. And I'm like, ew.
And it's like there's just like a criminalization of like poverty, and then the way the show kind of like gets like, you know, tries to get away with it is by like, again, like, you know, these students are like discriminated against, like systemically discriminated against within like the school that they go to. And then the show basically in that moment, like in setting up the conflict between like the, you know, the end class kids and like the high schoolers is like, you know, it just completely dismisses the very legitimate point made by like the like high schoolers who are like, you all are elite, you don't understand what the fuck it is like to be poor or what it's like to be like, you know, like oppressed and all this stuff. And then the show is like, no, like actually we're socially marginalized within the elite, so like
You're so
like,
right. I didn't even think about that.
And it's like, what are you even trying to say here? Like, what is like the end goal? Like, what are you trying to communicate here? Like, it's okay. Like, it's like, there's like 3 tiers of people. There's like the like elite who are bad. And then there's like the like marginalized within the elite. It's like the petty bourgeoisie or whatever. And then there's like the like, you know, the wretched proles at the bottom of like the whole thing. And it's like, oh my god, like come on now, what the fuck are you trying to say here, man? Like it's so that episode just pissed me off so much.
The biggest problem with all this is like, I know Silver, you touched it earlier, and I think it's really just leads to like, what does this show want to do? Because this show, like, especially in this first half, like, the identity is like, it's the person in the class that's like, yo, I'm everybody's friend. Oh, you want a sporty boy? Huh, I'm sporty. Oh, you want a smart person? I'm smart. Like, it tries to do everything, and I think we definitely like touched on this earlier. Like, it's not good at any of them the best when it could be. Like, if it really just stuck to something, and it goes with this like episodic, that's how you say it, type of vibe where it's like, we want to set up these arcs, but we don't, and like the plot sometimes becomes so irrelevant because like you're looking and you're like, oh yeah, we're here to like kill Sensei, like this is the goal, but like throughout it all, like it just kind of comes back every now and then when it's convenient. It's like, oh yeah, we gotta have a plot to kill him, and then that's the episode, and it's like, all right, let's go back to having fun. That's good for the week, and like things like that. And I think that's one of its biggest problems. Like, this show could have been like, it could have been real interesting. Like, we got kids, they're assassins, they're trying to kill the person that trains them to kill them. Like, on paper it sounds like a lot, but it has a lot of potential, but it could have been done especially much better in this first half.
Like, let's even talk about in that first episode where the big bully guy tried to blow up Nagita, the main character, and I was like, wow, that's a legitimate strategy. And yeah, it didn't work because it didn't, and he got scolded, and they're like, don't do that ever again. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of a lesson. Don't sacrifice people for the purposes of your own gain. I'm like, sure, that's fine. But I was like, wait, if we're thinking already in this frame of mind of just anything goes, then I'm like, okay, I'm kind of on board. What's gonna happen?
Right.
But then also the show's like, hey, we have all these kids, we could explore them. Let's get rid of them. And each episode just introduce an adult assassin who just comes in, and I'm just like, okay, so the adults aren't gonna solve it because they're not meant to. But is like the Japanese Special Defense Force still trying to assassinate Koro Sensei, or are the kids gonna do it? Who am I supposed to be focused on here? Oh, they sent a teacher here to train the kids up, but the kids don't want to do it. If they don't want to do it, why don't they find some kids that do want to do it? What is the point of these kids? Why these kids? Why these kids specifically? Koro Sensei could be helping out so many more people that have problems, but why? What is special about these kids?
I mean, that part does get addressed in the second part.
That
There
comes
is a
up
reason
later.
for it.
That comes up later.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. I don't want to really go down that route, but I do want to refer back to a bit what you said about this show not really knowing what it's trying to say, and honestly, sometimes I didn't try to take it too deep. I really didn't. But sometimes I'm like, you guys are setting up some nefarious ideas here. Let's talk about the female teacher.
Oh, Arena?
They are so mean to her for no reason. No, they have a reason. She's kind of promiscuous. That is like, okay, I watched it dubbed. So when she comes in, her name's like Yelovich or something, but then they just give her the nickname Miss Bitch, and I'm like, whoa, that's terrible. And they're like, oh, she's a bitch because, well, okay, so the setup, she came in as like a seductress assassin, which is a stereotype, as a woman, young woman, whatever. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And that she's only there to kill Koro Sensei. She's not there to teach. That's the whole thing. And they set that up. And so the kids don't like her because you're not teaching us. And I'm like, man, if I was this class, I'd be like, shut up. Like, this woman clearly is not here to teach. Why do you care? Why do you want this person to teach you when obviously there's a bigger threat? Did we forget the world's gonna blow up? Am I the only one who remembers this? Like, why were they so mad that this adult who wants money and not to have the world blow up doesn't want to teach them? Like, they're so mad. But then they call her a bitch. And then in the text box, and like I said, this might be a translation thing, it was like a bitch, a inscrutable or untrustworthy or hard to get along with woman, a female dog. But then it was also like a promiscuous woman. And I'm like, that's not correct. That is dubious and nefarious. And then even after she comes around and like after, because this is only in one episode, again, these are very episodic things that at least up until like the first like half of the first season. Even when she comes around and starts actually being a teacher and teaches them things, and the whole theme of the show is be like, oh, we're teaching you how to be realized people without actually doing traditional schooling methods, which could be interesting, they still call her a bitch and treat her terribly, even though she does nothing wrong. And they're like, oh, she's so immature. All she does is this and blah. And I'm just like, what is wrong with you kids? You kids are the most like pretentious, do nothing kids I've seen. Like, how dare you like place moral value judgments on this like agency woman who's been doing this for years, who's just doing her life? Like, I just had so many issues with that. Even though it was supposed to be sometimes for comedy, I just never found it comedic. I was just always like, why are you so mean to this teacher? She's fine. She does nothing wrong. She's doesn't want to teach and is kind of like, oh, I'd rather just hang out and have some fun, especially on Osaka at the beach. And then they're like, ugh, look at her having fun on vacation. Ugh.
Yeah. And I think it might come into culture. That might be a cultural play when it comes like when it takes like how serious education is taken. It's like, because like teacher is like a high esteem. Like, this is just from like studying education like around the world in general. Teacher, like, that's a title, and if you're gonna like claim that title, like in the States, we can get away with that. I've worked with teachers that can get away with that. Like, they were sleeping on the job, but they were like, you know, they teaching. What'd you expect? Like, versus like, but like over there,
they think of Mr. Perez's computer class
in
high school, where like people only played computer games.
Every computer
anyway,
class
sorry,
in high
didn't mean
school,
to. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, bet. No, but like, yeah, like the fact that she claimed to be a teacher and like lied. That, I think that was the biggest reason. But like, I think you're also right, because everyone's ignoring the biggest plot goal is to kill this man. Like, that's the biggest plot goal, but they keep ignoring it because Koro Sensei is a great teacher. Why don't you teach like Koro Sensei? Like, all these, like, they're comparing it, and it's like, we kind of have three things competing, and I don't know which one's the most important. and
Yeah,
I don't
they
think
do
y'all are
have
choosing the
a,
right
uh,
one.
Like half the show, they view their grades as more important than saving the entire world.
Yeah.
I will say in their defense though, there are like a series of like structural like incentives and disincentives. So it's like they are like, it's real. They are marginalized. That is a deliberate thing. You know, they are like, you know, outcasts, pariahs in their school.
They are
And it's like,
comically
and they're like abandoned.
The whole
Like they're
robots.
basically like the refuse, like the garbage of like the school, meant to like be like a permanent undercast. Like that's what they are within the school. And then Koro Sensei is like the one person who's like, no, like y'all are actually like, I see your value and your potential, and like I will like do everything in my power to raise your grades up and to show you that those kids aren't any better than you. And so it's like there is some like I kind of get the vacillating a little bit. Like I can kind of reason that one away given like the kind of like structural factors in the background. But I do think in the broader context of the fact that the world is going to be destroyed, it seems relatively trivial to focus on that, you know, on like the kind of on those dynamics. But you know,
But these
I
are
don't know.
kids.
Anywho, what else?
Wait,
is there
before
to
you move on.
comment about
When you
this?
talk
Yeah.
about Koro Sensei building them up, there were so many times, because I go back to that high school kidnapping episode too, where it's like any problem these kids find themselves in, I just kept thinking in the back of my head, Koro Sensei's gonna solve this, like, bar none. And that like lends itself to everything except maybe the final exam arc for like 3 episodes, which honestly was my favorite arc, not because of the kids, but because of like the one like top number 1 student and his whole like interaction with his father, the principal. I was like, wait, where's this manga? Where's this anime? Can I watch this instead? I want to see this, whatever this dynamic is playing out. But there were so many times where it's just like, did these kids actually accomplish anything, or was it Koro Sensei just facilitating them to do it, which you know could speak to the idea of like building confidence in human beings and like, oh, this person gave them the ability to see that they can do it. But I don't know, as an outside viewer, a lot of times I just thought like, oh, the only reason this was able to be done is because Koro Sensei exists and he's untouchable. I didn't feel like the characters ever realized themselves like as people in any type of way, or if they did, it was sort of just like, hey, this character realized himself as a person. Remember when Karma fought that dude and he felt bad, but now his head's down, so he's focused now, so it's real. And I'm like, okay, sure. If the show tells me it's what it is, that's what it is. Man, fuck this show.
Tell us how you really feel. Oh yeah, okay, so I have one last, and it's great because it's actually a pretty good transition to like kind of begin to delve into the themes of the show. But I will say, coming back to something Silver said very, very early on, about kind of talking
I'm happy
about
y'all
the
keep coming back to my
difficulties.
points.
You make good points.
You're the person. You're the one.
Yeah.
You're the one that we're going to be like, hey, yes, we want to talk about that.
So, kind of speaking to that, you know, this whole notion of like the difficulties of like, you know, developing characters when you're dealing with like a classroom setting. And I feel like there's like, what is it? This is something that I think can be compared to like different shows that like take place in a school setting. And so, what immediately comes to mind for me is your boy's favorite anime of all time. Hot take incoming for some folks, but that's because y'all ain't really looking at the show so deeply. Kill la Kill, I think, does a pretty great fucking job of like developing characters within a like classroom setting. And I think one of the things that distinguishes Kill la Kill in that sense, there's like a heavy focus placed on a small cast of students, you know, rather than like a like kind of like sometimes we're in, sometimes we're out, focus on like different students, if that makes sense. And so
they show every character's name in the OPs, so it makes it seem like each of these characters you should remember their names, but it doesn't. If that's what you're like going in, like it kind of does that half in thing. But continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's what immediately comes to mind. I know some of you fellows were talking about shows You know, and I guess it's like, what is like the role, like how central is like, that's like an interesting question, like how central is like the classroom, the class as a whole, composed of different individuals versus like the individuals, certain individuals within the class. And so it feels like this show tries to kind of do both at the same time. Like, problem is just that I think it might just be like a matter of form, like within the context of everything else the show is doing. It just ends up like, you know, all the different things that it's focusing on, it just ends up feeling like it's focusing on like a couple characters sometimes in a couple episodes, or like there's maybe one person, Nagisa, whose like character arc is kind of more dragged out, and it's like, what is happening? And it's like most of the characters kind of fall into the background or are like defined by like one generic trait, like fat girl or whatever, or science girl, you know, etc., etc. I don't know, man. I don't know. That's definitely not one of the strengths of the show.
I mean,
and I
think
think
about this. No, one of the things it just hit me is just like, compare this to like Naruto. This is gonna sound weird, just stick with me. Naruto's tuning exam.
Yes,
so you
I
have
was just thinking that.
the rookie 9 and the rookie Konoha 9. All those 9 characters besides Naruto's teams that are introduced, and then also the other 3 from Guy Sensei's team who aren't part of the rookie 9. So you have now effectively the Konoha 12. That is a cohort, a class of the Leaf Village Ninja. And throughout the tuning exams, you learn a bit each about them, at least to the point where it's like, this character has distinctive motivations, like character, like this is how they're going to interact with each. You can basically figure out how this character would interact with any other character over the course of just the tuning exam arc. Now, yeah, later in Naruto, it just becomes Naruto and Sasuke and whatever, and certain characters don't get focused. But that's how my go-to of like, you have a large cast. How do you make it so that the largeness is relevant, but it's also not to the point, to the detriment that no one sticks out?
Yeah.
And I just thought that was maybe something that could happen, but no. Again, I could watch the OP now and be like, even character design wise, like Nagita's female friend is just girl with green hair who talks to Nagita the most. What is she? Who is she? Who? Like,
you'll learn.
Later.
Yes, I feel like all this stuff is building up, but I think this goes to the end of the day. I don't think this, even if the second half is incredible, it doesn't excuse what's going on in this first half. Like, don't get me wrong, the second half could still be good, still be great. It will be good on its own contained and build off all that, but this first beginning was so rough.
Yeah.
So rough.
No.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
one of the... Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things you're kind of making me think about, Boiz, is how like building like structures of like relationships among like characters is something that can like help, you know. So I think like in terms of like, you know, developing those characters or making their actions feel like, you know, giving them motivations, like giving them etc., you know, goals or whatever. So it's like with the Konoha 12, like they all break into like, you know, squads of 3, and like those squads have relationships, those squads have like backgrounds, those squads you know, are like competing with like the other squads, and then at the same time there's this like larger set of like, you know, like this larger structure that they all fit into. Or like with Kill la Kill, you have like the, you know, the student council, and they all kind of like relate to like Satsuki, and they all get a backstory in relation to Satsuki, and like
And then you get the level 2s, and then you get the level 1s, and then you get Rukia, who's outside the structure.
Exactly.
You build relationships between, hell, you have Gamagori and Mako's relationship, which is like not important at all, but it's still something there that you can see how these two characters would relate to each other, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know how AI girl and dude who we can't see eyes of would interact. I can't know how dread dark-skinned bully kid would interact with the other girl who does gymnastics good. Like, who are these people? And also, I just want to put out, this is probably gonna be my last like major critique before we get into like themes and stuff. This is more just a real plot thing. Why did Nagita cross-dress in that one episode? Like,
oh my god, thank you for naming that. Oh my god, that
let's
was
talk
the
about
most...
the final arc.
Oh
Let's
my
talk about this final arc.
Let's do it. I'll start with that episode. Let's just like fucking scorch
Let's go.
earth this
Let's
shit.
go, man.
Okay, so
You're
I'll
on
start.
the beach. Go. You go. You go. You do it.
No, you go. I'll
Okay.
talk. I'll speak to that little part like that. But
So first
you
of all,
go ahead.
we passed the most interesting stuff about the whole final exam. The kids like made a good grade. It was a good moment. Sure, there were other things in the final exam, but it was fun. Whatever. So they win this trip to the beach. They're all there. They're gonna assassinate Koro Sensei, and then like things happen. Kids. Most of the cast gets a disease, poisoned or whatever by some hidden assassin that like is hidden up and is demanding that they return Koro Sensei. And at this point, Koro Sensei's been reduced to this ball marble structure that he can't interact with. So he's basically taken out, but he's still being tagged along. So they're going up to deliver Koro Sensei to meet these demands to this big assassin. And stop me if I'm skipping points, but like I'm just trying to remember everything.
No, you're
So-
good so
No,
far.
you're pretty good.
The way that I thought they set it up originally is that Kurasuma, who's a great character, by the way, probably one of my favorites, is like talking about some big bad assassin who's just briefly mentioned as like the world's #1 assassin, but he's never met him. So I thought that was what this was going to be, but whatever. That point gets dropped. Maybe it gets picked up in season 2. But
Yeah, it does.
so the guy who's calling them for ransom is like, send your 2 shortest students and only Koro Sensei. Of course, they don't do that, and all of the able-bodied, I think it's like 12 of them, kids, start going because they're like, no, we have the confidence. Koro Sensei, Kurasuma, and Miss Yelovich have been teaching us. We're going to do it. So the 3 teachers and the 12 kids are going up. They first meet a poison man. Now, me thinking, just thinking, if this man really was like, hey, if you don't come alone, I'm just gonna leave and not give the antidote. The second you notice that there's more than 2 kids, why are you letting them continue through this plot? Like, this doesn't make sense. The entire, like, threat of getting caught doesn't matter anymore. So I'm like, whatever. And the AI girl's here too because we need someone who can do AI things. And I'm like, oh, she's cute, whatever. So you meet the poison man. The poison man plot is done in like 2 fights because it's like, oh, Kurasuma just doesn't get poisoned that hard. I mean, he does, but he can take it. So then we go past that. Kurasuma's sort of poisoned, but they're still going wrong. Miss Yelovich distracts some guards by doing the one thing she's really good at, and they're all just like, everyone's surprised that she's able to do this, even though this is literally her whole character since the beginning. And I'm just like, guys, what? What is this show trying to tell me? Why are these kids exist? And then we get to the club. It's like a club for these rich kids to like hang out because they're all in Osaka and it's like a beautiful place, but it's only for like rich children of rich entrepreneurs or whatever to hang out in the club. And they're like, oh, the guys can't go because they're not used to going to a club. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. We're going with this whole thing that girls are more mature than guys and guys just don't know how to interact in social settings. I don't know if that was your life, but it certainly wasn't mine. Okay. And they're like, oh, the girls are gonna go. But then Kurasuma's like, no, that's too dangerous. And I'm like, okay, so we should all go, right? And it's like, no, we'll send Nagisa with them dressed as a girl. Because why?
Because Karma wanted a picture. That's literally
I mean,
it.
yes, that's what they
That's
said
really
at
it.
the end. But just because it's like, oh, it's for comedy, I didn't laugh. Am I laughing? Was I laughing? No, I was not laughing. I just kept asking, why? And then he doesn't even do anything while dressed as a girl. He gets taken away by some dude to just talk and have a mini talk about like
Yeah, let me
not-
speak to that.
yeah,
Tag in.
you do
Tag
this.
in.
Tag in.
Okay. So this is one of those places where I was just like, what the fuck is this show trying to say? Like, what is the ideology here? It just feels like someone who doesn't have a coherent worldview, which granted, like, that there's a lot of people like that in the world, and I'm not necessarily like making a value judgment as to that, that being that person's fault, but like, it's like, it's like this weird like concept of like coolness gets thrown around like in like these interactions between like Nagisa and this like kid whose like dad is like a celebrity or some shit, and like it like there's not really like a cohesive definition given to what coolness means. The only thing that we know is what coolness is not, and coolness is not smoking weed cigarettes. And it's like, where did this come from? Like, what is this? And it's like, coolness is like not smoking weed cigarettes. Coolness is like not like trying to be like, it's like, maybe it's like authenticity, like maybe that's part of it. Like they're trying to say to the kid, like, be authentic, like don't like, you know, be inauthentic, like don't try to like lead on like your dad's status to like impress people or something. I don't know, maybe that's what coolness is, who knows. But to me, as I was watching it, I was like, this is like rather incoherent. And then I'm gonna actually take a step back and make another critique of a part that Base kind of left out. But like, prior to the club, there's this like instance of like Karma facing off against this like assassin who, oh well, it might be after the club, whatever. Point is, it works because we're talking about it now. So there's this guy who has like, who fights with his bare fists, and it's like, you know, grip, there was right? Earlier there was like a plot point, earlier there was like a plot point where it's like Karma like didn't do as well at the like final exams because he kind of slacked off. And it's like, instead of like, I don't know, you know, showing his like process of like, you know, like wrestling with, you know, the lie that he had learned about himself, that he could just slack off and do really well, and like growing as a person, instead of doing that, we go from point A to Z where he's already solved the problem. And it's like, and he like, you know, defeats this like assassin guy by like, I don't know, paying like extra close attention to his like movements, or setting up like, you know, like intentionally like misguiding the guy or like whatever. And it's just like, like, why do you even bother to set up this plot point if you're just not gonna like develop it? It's just like, there's like no, I'm just like, what is this? Like it's like, you like, a character arc is supposed to be an arc. It's not supposed to be a straight line. You know what I mean? Or it's not supposed to be like, you start at point A and then you end at point B with nothing happening in between. It's supposed to be a fucking arc. You know what I'm saying? Or it's like, if you're trying to set up to be like a positive character arc, right? Which is like that kind of character arc where it's like someone like learns and gets better, because this is not like a flat character arc where it's like Goku, you know, who's just like the same throughout all of DBZ. But it's like, what are you even trying to do here with this character arc? I don't know. I was just like, this is whack as fuck. And then let me just like I'm gonna skip to the end, because honestly I don't even really think that like everything that happens from that point to like the end is like particularly like worthy of like talking about too much. But like, point is they like get to like the top of the tower, and then at like the top of the tower, we'll actually come back to this guy. It's like someone who was like their like old instructor, was like humiliated by Nagisa, you know, because Nagisa was kind of able to, Nagisa was able to like almost assassinate the guy, and like we'll get into this more. I still don't know how. There is like an interesting like, how do I put it? There's like an interesting like philosophical thing going on here, which is like different forms of like power. And like, we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But like, point is, like, this guy, you know, he's built his like basically his whole like self-image on like, you know, being like extremely powerful, like being like this like patriarchal figure, and we'll get into that. But like, anyways, Nagisa is able to like, once again, like, okay, so at the top of the tower, it's like the guy basically like gets like rid of like the cure, like he like destroys like the cure. And then it's like, you know, one of Nagisa's friends is like sick, which Nagisa like discovered, like follower dude is like sick. And then Nagisa's like, I'm gonna kill this guy. And I'm like, okay, that's legit. I get it. Like, this is interesting. And then like everybody else is like, no, Nagisa, don't kill him. And it's like, but like, Koro Sensei, you were training them to be assassins.
Isn't that the whole point of it all?
Yeah,
to learn to kill people. What have y'all been?
No. The character I trained to kill people was about to kill someone. I really felt that meme of that, like, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. I was just like, what is this show trying to say? Killing Koro Sensei. Oh, learning how to kill people can be a metaphor for character development, but don't actually kill anyone. So it's like, so don't complete your character development. And I know we just skipped over it, but this also contradicts the idea that we just had with the shooter people who like hesitated a bit, and it's like they had to learn to not hesitate.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's the line? Where do I go too far?
Yeah.
It is
It's
so
arbitrary.
annoying.
That's the problem with the show. It like presupposes certain instances of violence as being okay and other instances of violence as being not okay, but doesn't give you a rationale for why that's the case. That's exactly that's what it is. And then after, so this is what really pissed me off. And also Koro Sensei, so I'll clarify, Koro Sensei is unable to help because of like a prior like assassination, you know, so like the Deus Ex Machina is like thrown out the window because he like had to go into like absolute defense mode because the kids almost like, you know, they brought him to his like last like, you know, possible, so far this is, you know, would be kind of like seeing his like last possible like recourse to prevent himself from dying as he goes and turns into this like cute little ball and then like is just like indestructible but can't do anything. And then, you know, so he's out of the game, you know, he's out of play. Then all of a sudden, like the guy, you know, he smashes the cures and Nagisa decides, I'm not gonna kill this guy, I'll just like embarrass him, and he like embarrasses him once more.
Let's give it up. His ultimate technique was clapping real loud and okay, I'm gonna, oh god, he doesn't know what's happening, and I'm like, Jesus, I hate this show so much.
I don't remember, there's like a rationale given to that, but I don't remember what it is. But anyways,
yeah, there were some conditions that needed to be in place for that technique to work.
Yeah, sure. Trained assassin defeated by clap. Put it on the post, guys.
I mean, hey, for all we know, that could be an actual assassination technique.
Oh, yeah, I'm not
in the class.
How many assassins do you know? But I know how many the author knows. 0.
and so then the show is like afterwards, it's like you're left with this like very real like high stakes situation where it's like this guy smashed all the fucking cures. What are they gonna do about the kids who are gonna die? And it's like, oh god, this could be really dark and really interesting. And then like the assassins that like the kids defeated, like the kids encounter them and they're like, actually, we were never against you guys. Like, we have honor. We have this thing called honor. And like, we knew the guy who was paying us was crazy. So we were like, let's just like go along with his act and make it seem like we're actually going to, or it's like let's go up along with his act to a certain point. And it's like that certain point ends up being like the like whole fucking point of the arc, because like the poison guy is like, oh, I didn't actually poison the kids, I just like gave them like food poisoning. And it's like, motherfucker, that was the whole goddamn point of the arc. You just like spat in the face. Like, it's like, why did I watch this? Like, what purpose did this serve? You're telling me that if everybody involved had chosen to do absolutely nothing,
oh my god,
we would have ended up with the exact same end result, just about. Like, you're telling me that?
Pretty much.
Why did you just make me sit through all these episodes? Why?
Like,
was the
best
point?
way I can describe this arc as forgettable is like, you can take this entire arc out from the moment that Sensei goes into his absolute defense form to the very end. Take it out, and you literally gain positive points for the show. You lose nothing.
Yeah.
This is the living embodiment. I just put the picture in the chat of the "we were bad, but now we're good" meme.
It's like it's basically a watered down Spy Kids villain. Like, at least in Spy Kids, like with their villains, they were here for it. We was really getting some evil people. But like here, like, no, like this is its complication. It's like, let's make it for kids. Let's bring some different honor that doesn't come up because we are literally having trained assassins who want to kill people. Like, in any other context, this could make a little more sense, but this whole show is about, well, should be about, we're trying to kill someone and we're trained to kill people and we fight people who kill. Nowhere in that does it say, like, actually, you know, we were fake killers. We just made your tummy ache. How you feeling? Let's go out for ice cream afterwards. Like, in nowhere does that type of sentiment fit.
Hey, what's up everyone? It's Boiz. Hope you are enjoying yourselves as much as we are discussing Assassination Classroom.
Do note that this is only part 1 of our discussion, so be on the lookout for part 2. You can keep abreast of all of our releases by following us wherever you get your podcasts and on Twitter at Boiz Anime. That's Boiz Anime. Also follow our video essay Twitter, Otakutariat. That's Otakutariat, Otakutariat. You can find both Anime Rambling Boys and Otakutariat on YouTube. Finally, if you want to support us in helping making this content, subscribe to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/otakutariat. Again, that's Otakutariat. Shout out to our first homie Patreon, Ethan. Love you, buddy. Thank you all again for listening. Hope to see you all in the next one.